This show is sponsored by NatureBox, and NatureBox ships great tasting, healthy snacks right to your door. Forget the vending machine, the snack aisles, and the convenience stores. Start snacking much smarter with healthy, delicious snacks. You can pick them: dark cocoa almonds, for example, peanut butter, nom noms. My favorite, the pineapple rings, so succulent. Support this broadcast by ordering your free NatureBox sampler box at naturebox.com/CFP radio. That's right, free snacks at freenaturebooks.com/CFP radio. Folks, this is the Hagmann and Hagmann report for today. It's a manic Monday. Indeed it is. October 13th, 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann. Usually across from me, about 6 feet away from me, is my son Joe Hagmann. And as I always say, together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann report. Joe is out tonight. He had some minor surgery this morning, so he won't be with us tonight, but he'll be back in full force tomorrow. Nothing earth-shaking, and no plastic surgery. Boy, isn't that something? If that was, how old would I feel, right? Folks, you're listening to the only show where the news is presented to you in 3D. We look well beyond the headlines and bylines and bring you the news behind the news. We broadcast each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Our home base on the Internet is hagmanandhagmann.com. That's hagmanandhagmann.com. Please tell a friend about this show, that website, and, of course, what we do. We're also simulcast through the good graces of the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There you could tune us in at the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com, not to be confused with HagmannandHagmann.com. Just want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for your belief and trust in us. This is really a minefield of information and headlines that we see. We're just getting barraged by news reports every single day. It seems like every hour of the day, things are just hitting us really hard. Here's the schedule for tonight as the program unfolds, tonight's edition. At the bottom of the hour, we're going to take a brief break and then welcome on to our show Mr. Greg Evensen, Coach Dave Daubenmire, John Haller, and Doug Woodward. Now, you might think, wow, that's a crowded auditorium. No, it's not. We're going to be talking about current events, but most importantly, we're going to be talking about November, giving you information about the November 14th and 15th conference in Columbus, Ohio, where Russ Dizdar and others will be speaking. I've got to tell you, if you go to hagmanandhagmann.com, if you go to the right or left-hand side, it's right there on top. I mean, right there on top. Big red picture. Click on that. It'll take you to the Prophecy Forum, and I can guarantee you, you will learn, you will know. You'll see what's up for that, and I'm just so excited because we're going to be there on the 14th and 15th. Joe and I will be, and in fact, the plans are we're going to be broadcasting live from that venue as well, at least one of the days. Now, more on that after the bottom of the hour. Meanwhile, what to make of the situation with Ebola, what to make of the situation with ISIS, with World War III coming, what to make of the situation with the stock market, with other issues. Folks, let me just say this. All of this is being choreographed. Everything that we're seeing right now is orchestrated. I have no doubt in my mind, after doing so much research on these various subjects, the timing is exquisite in its evil genius. We're going to be taking we're going to be talking about these issues as well with gentlemen tonight, but also we're going to be taking your calls as well. I want to hear what you've got to say about all of this. I truly believe I happened to grab Bill Frist's book, and if you're unfamiliar with Bill Frist, he was the where did I put it? For crying out loud, he was the seriously. Okay, here it is. All right, Bill Frist, Senator. He was the only doctor in the Senate around the time of 9/11. And I pulled this book off my bookshelf because I wanted to find out what Bill Frist had to say about Ebola and other viral hemorrhagic fevers, at least assessing the risk back with respect to the terrorism, from the terrorism angle. Excuse me. Well, here's what Bill Frist has to say about this, at least in 2002. And this is, I believe, post-anthrax. Yeah, this is written post-anthrax. It was this 2002. The copyright on this is 2002. So right around the time of the anthrax attacks is when he wrote this book. Now, one of the things that makes the Ebola virus so frightening, and this is information, folks, by the way, that I think this is standard information. Let's use this as a baseline for understanding, okay? I did research this. This is true. Everything is true. Now, there are points in here that need to be further explored and explained, but in terms of the factual basis of this particular Ebola or Ebola in general, my research found this to be true. One of the things that makes Ebola virus so frightening is how very little we actually know about it. The scientists, many of the scientists, we don't know, for example, where the disease originated or even how it is naturally spread. This according, again, to Senator Frist back in 2002. Now, I take issue with that because I do believe not only do they know, but they are behind it. When I say they, I'm talking about the criminal cabal of globalists and scientists, and you might think that's crazy, but folks, I think the proof will be coming out. I believe this. As one thing that's heavily connected to this is the dead scientists. Remember all the microbiologists beginning back in the perhaps in the mid 90s, late 90s, and then into the 2000s. Remember those? If you go to stevequayle.com, that's stevequayle.com, Quayle, click on the Dead Scientists link, and you can read about the dead scientists, the dead microbiologists. But let's get back to Bill Frist. What we do know about the Ebola virus is that it kills with frightening efficiency. Up to 90% of its victims die. And we know that along with the other diseases known as viral hemorrhagic fevers, that's VHF, it is a bioterror threat we can't ignore. Certainly it is. One question, however, is in whose hands? Who is delivering this bioterror weapon? Hemorrhagic fever can result from infection from one of several viruses. Now, this is important to understand. This is the breakdown, and I think from this breakdown, and we can use this as a baseline. The best known of the viral hemorrhagic fevers is, of course, the Ebola virus, named for the river valley in Zaire, which is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where the first outbreak occurred back, I believe it was 1976. VHF actually tells you a lot about this illness. The name, of course, viral hemorrhagic fever. These infections cause, of course, high fever, widespread, uncontrollable bleeding. And so when you see photographs, for example, of purported victims with hemorrhagic fevers, folks, just let me remind you, there should be some blood there, in addition to everything else. But blood certainly is a component. The term hemorrhagic refers to one of the disease's most gory and frightful characteristics. Now, in its most severe form, infection causes bleeding under the skin, subcutaneously, in internal organs. It liquefies the organs. And from the mouth, the nose, the ears, the eyes, anywhere you've got an opening, your blood is going to seep out. And in some cases, even through the skin. It's important, according to Frist, that humans are not natural carriers or hosts for the organisms that cause VHFs. Now, think about that statement. That's very carefully crafted. The viruses normally rely on animals or insects as disease carriers, but once an outbreak begins, the virus can be spread from person to person. Now, at the time that this was written, he wrote, through direct contact with blood or bodily fluids. Folks, today, and Steve Quayle was way ahead of the curve on this. I certainly suspect that Ebola is airborne, both in practically speaking, as well as, well, it's airborne. If you go back and look, there's a difference between being airborne and aerosolized, but the leap between the two, although significant, is not that big of a leap. If it's airborne via, we'll just say, a sneeze, for example, a wet sneeze, and depending on the size of the particles that hang in the air. Now, I'm not going to get into this that much, but if you've ever been around somebody, a family member, who sneezed and you got this wash of droplets, tiny droplets, mist droplets, well, certainly to me, that's airborne, is it not? I mean, by definition, that's by definition airborne. Now, in virus form or in viral form, could it be airborne just through moisture droplets from the lungs or through normal breathing? I do suspect that there is scientific evidence Ebola has become or is about to become fully, by definition, airborne. CDC Director Tim Frieden, remember him announcing a week ago that he was confident that they were going to stop Ebola in its tracks here in the United States. Well, anyone who believes anything out of the CDC's mouth is just absolutely crazy. I've got no confidence in them, and I know you don't either. But also, the political players are making this a politics game where they're saying, well, had the GOP, the Republicans not cut certain funding for the Ebola virus, we would already have a vaccine against it. Well, folks, I contend that the vaccine end of this is to me anyway, is where we're headed, mandatory vaccinations. And if you look at what Dave Hodges has written, if you look at what Steve Quayle has talked about or listen to what Steve Quayle has talked about, if you've listened to what Greg Evensen has said, all of this combined, I do believe that the evidence, the propensity of, or the preponderance of evidence is well on the side of the once considered conspiracy fringe like me, like Steve, like others, in the fact that we are looking at something that has been deliberately staged. Now, let me get back to Bill Frist again here, because he does make some important distinctions in the differences of Ebola. And this, to me, is important to understand, because when people say Ebola, they automatically, it's a viral hemorrhagic fever. However, there are different strains, of course. And in case, if you know this already, just bear with me. Of the 4 viral families that cause these viral hemorrhagic fevers, there are 2 that are considered most likely to be used by bioterrorists, or 2 that are right now up front in the front of things. They are the filoviruses, which include Ebola, and Marburg hemorrhagic fevers, and the arenaviruses, which include Lassa and South American hemorrhagic fevers. Now, why do I make this distinction? Well, okay, what are filoviruses? Well, if you look at a filovirus through a microscope, they appear long and stringy, and like filaments. You can picture that. So they were named for their distinctive appearance. The first virus, the first Ebola virus, was discovered during a fatal outbreak that occurred, well, when I say, let me back up. The first filovirus was discovered during a fatal outbreak that occurred back in 1967 when laboratory workers in Marburg, Germany, hence the name Ebola Marburg, and Belgrade, Yugoslavia, developed hemorrhagic fever after handling tissues from African green monkeys that had been imported for research. The outbreak resulted in 31 cases and 7 deaths. Now, that specific virus is named after Marburg, and it reportedly went away as quickly and mysteriously as it first surfaced. Then back in 1975, a traveler who was likely exposed to the virus in Zimbabwe became ill in South Africa, passing the virus along to his companion, who was also a nurse. In 1976, Ebola became the second and the only other member admitted to the filovirus family. Now, this is back 13 years ago. Ebola comes in 4 different strains. It was first identified when outbreaks of the viral hemorrhagic fevers occurred in northern Zaire and southern Sudan. It's more deadly than its Marburg cousin. It killed 90% of the people in the Zaire outbreak and half of those affected in Sudan. Now, listen to this. The scientists discovered that the 2 outbreaks were actually caused by 2 different related strains of the virus. So those 2 strains, one was named Ebola Zaire and the other Ebola Sudan. A 3rd strain was identified here in the United States in 1989 when hemorrhagic fever swept through these Asiatic monkeys that had been imported for research to a Reston, Virginia laboratory. Now, that particular strain is named Ebola Reston. Supposedly, it did not cause any type of illness in the lab workers who were infected. The lab workers were infected with this Ebola Reston, but they didn't present any symptoms. You can guess, folks. I mean, Ebola Reston, the outbreak there occurring as it did near our nation's capital, did in fact bring Ebola to national consciousness back in 1989, and its fame was further enhanced after it was chronicled in Richard Preston's best-selling book, The Hot Zone. Now, there's one more, the 4th strain. It's Ebola Ivory Coast. It was identified in a patient in the Ivory Coast 5 years later in 1994. Now, this was, interestingly, the first time, reportedly, the disease had been discovered in West Africa. So, since 1976, Ebola outbreaks in various forms have occurred sporadically in Africa. There was an outbreak in 1995 in Kikwit, Zaire, claiming the lives of 80% of the 316 people who were known contracted the disease. Well, now what are we looking at here? Using that as a baseline. This is what we reportedly knew. We, meaning us, the unwashed masses. We were presented with this by Bill Frist. This is what we know, or what we were told back in 2002. If you remember at that same time, and I remember this vividly, as Steve Quayle had written, Breathe No Evil, the link between the scientists, the microbiologists who were working on the working on Ebola and other hemorrhagic fevers, many were killed or died under mysterious circumstances. I find it interesting, folks, if not telling, that I got to tell you this. If you go to if you go to stevequayle.com and click on the Dead Scientist link on the top, you'll see it there. It's on the right-hand side on the top. If you just look at if you just click on the first one, the 2000 to 2014, isn't it interesting that 17, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, that was shot down and crashed in Ukraine? Isn't it interesting that we had Glenn Thomas, who was an AIDS and Ebola expert, along with about 107 others, researchers and scientists, who were aboard this flight. They were on their way to an international AIDS conference in Australia. You know, among the other delegates aboard the plane was Joep Lang, a leading AIDS researcher and former president of the International AIDS Society. Now, Joep Lang reportedly, claimed to have knowledge about a cure for AIDS. But what's not being reported about this meeting in Australia, which never took place, or the statement never was released because the people who were going to make the statement were all killed, had to do, based on my research, my investigation, had to do with AIDS, yes, but also Ebola, and how Ebola was following the AIDS plot. Now, we don't have time to get into that tonight. Perhaps later in the week we will, because I think this is a very important aspect of the Ebola situation. Folks, what I think is happening in this country today, in the West, I'll even go that far, is a deliberate, pre-planned, orchestrated infection of the population, or at least a segment of the population, to not only for population control, but you've got to think bigger. We always have to think bigger, think outside of the box. In addition to culling the population, perhaps not as efficiently as they might like, we will see mandatory vaccinations. We will see mandatory shelter in place. We will see mandatory quarantines. We will see essentially martial law. Whether they call it martial law or not, effectively it will be martial law. If you look at the headlines, if you look at not the American or Western headlines, the exception, of course, is Canada Free Press here in the West, CanadaFreePress.com. But if you look at, for example, overseas, the headlines overseas, you get a much better, precise picture about about what really will be taking place, about the geometric explosion of Ebola. Schools, the timing of this could not be any better choreographed, with schools closing, perhaps are forced to close We're getting close to the ballot, the election, midterm elections. We're getting close to the flu season. So look at it from a larger perspective. Why haven't the borders been closed? Why haven't people from the hot zones in Africa been required to stay put? Accident? Incompetence? I don't ascribe. No. Incompetence is not any part of this. This is intentional. Meanwhile, you've got Obama celebrating or participating in his 200 golf game. Does this look like a man who's concerned? Of course not. Read in? Perhaps. Concerned? No. Folks, we're going to be bringing on Greg Evensen. On this Monday edition, Monday, October 13th, 2014. I know some of you out there were making book that I couldn't handle the switchboard, and, well, some of you actually are right, because I did have a little issue there with some dead air, but you know what? It's all good. I want to welcome right now one of my favorite people in the world. Met him for the first time in Bozeman, Montana, of all places. One of the most powerful speakers, individuals I know, Coach Dave Daubenmire. Coach, are you with us?
I'm with you, Doug, and God bless you for allowing us to come on the air tonight and talk about what we got planned here. And the Mutual Admiration Society applies here, Doug.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. Listening to you speak, and those who attended Bozeman or have the DVDs, and of course they're still available for purchase. I've got to tell you, it was one of the best. It was one of the best times I had watching you just get out of that little box there, and really speaking from your heart. So, we now we've got another conference coming up, which you're going to tell us about. I'm going to bring on if I can do this properly. Okay, so folks, bear with me here now. I'm a newbie at this, okay? I'm going to bring on, let's see here. How about, who might this be? Who do I have on?
I think you.
Okay.
Doug, this is John Haller.
John, great to have you. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. John, I got you on there. Now let me bring on, in addition to that, and again, folks, bear with me here, okay? My son, my sidekick, he's not with me tonight, so I'm doing this flying blind. How about Mr. Greg Evensen as well? We're going to bring him on, too. Greg, are you there, sir?
Doug, I am. It's good to be with you. You're no journeyman yet, but you're working on it.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. You know, I'm flying blind here, as blind as a bat. Now, who am I missing? I'm missing Doug Woodward, right? Okay. Dave, or gentlemen, what area code might Doug be calling from? Do we know that?
Doug will be calling 206.
206?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. I got him. Mr. Woodward, are you with us? All right, perfect.
I am here. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to back slowly out of the studio. and, Coach, let me turn it over to you first as I walk back slowly out of the studio. You go ahead, and you called me earlier today, and we set this up kind of on the fly, but I got to tell you, I think this is a fantastic time to talk about the Prophecy Forum's November Columbus Conference. Coach, take it away, sir.
Well, Doug, thanks, and I'm going to start off with it here. And I'm going to try to get out of the way a little bit. Actually, I've been going through quite a transformation in my own life, Doug, realizing that so much of what we're hearing from our pulpits and so much we're learning about Christianity is just so shallow. It's just the lowlands of Christianity, just the bare bones of it. And you know, I became a follower of Steve Quayle, and I've known Greg a while, and just doing some of the research and some of the stuff that they were talking about. And man, oh man, when I finally went out, was able to go to the conference out in Bozeman, Montana, and heard Russ Dizdar and some of that stuff, my eyes really began to be open and understand exactly what was going on. And it was in a meeting about I don't know, maybe a month ago now. It wasn't a meeting. Greg Evensen invited my wife Michelle and I up for a weekend, and we were up there at Greg's place, and I said, listen, Greg, man, my heart's on fire here. Time is running short. We are running short. And everybody is They're blaming the politics. They're just blaming everything other than what the real problems are. And I have an urgency as a football coach. I don't care what the scoreboard looks like. I always taught my guys to play to the end. And no matter what the score was when this game's over, there's another game next week. We have got to continue to prepare no matter how bad things look. And I've always been under the impression that we're supposed to occupy until he returns. And the idea, much of prophecy, which turned me off, to be honest with you, much of it turned me off because I saw it as people who were sitting around just waiting for the end times to come. They weren't fighting back. They weren't pushing back. They were watching all this evil come down upon us. And it just went against every bone in my body. And I said, Greg, listen, I don't care what it looks like, brother. We have got to prepare and move forward. And so I said, let's do a conference in Columbus. So Greg and I, when I left, my wife and I, when we left, he and Liz headed home. We were kind of set on trying to do one in November. We get home and find out there's one already going on in Columbus, Ohio in November. I didn't know John Haller. I didn't know Doug Woodward. I didn't know any of these guys that were going on. They reached out to us and said, is there any way we can blend this thing together? And I talked to Steve Quayle. I talked to Greg. I said, I don't know. I said, I'm a coach. I put a team together. I don't understand all of this stuff, but I want to put a team together that is going to equip people to understand exactly what's going on, like the men of Issachar, who understood the times in which they lived and knew what it was that Israel needed to do. We need to do something. We just can't go from conference to conference, from video to video. We have got to begin to prepare and declare and to equip the people to understand what's going on around us and prepare to be able to combat what's surely coming down the highway. Well, it wasn't too long, Ebola breaks out and ISIS breaks out and all this stuff. It's coming so fast we can't even keep up with it. So I had a good conversation with John Haller and a good conversation with Doug, and I talked to Greg, and we've got this conference coming up November 14th and 15th in Dublin, Ohio, which is a suburb, northwestern suburb of Columbus, Ohio. And we want to – the world's upside down, folks. That's what it is. And so we want to be able to do two things. Number one, try to help open your eyes and prepare you for what lies ahead. That's what Greg's an expert at. I'm going to hand it to you here in a second, Greg, and talk about what it is that you do best. John Haller, I listened to the one that you have posted tonight on your website, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So that a pastor would talk about that. John, I'm not telling tales on John. He's a former evangelifish pastor. He was part of that old religious system whose eyes have come open and he's come out of it. And Doug's been one of these researchers and an author on the blood moon. And I said, my goodness, we have got to get this information into the hands of people to understand what's going on around us. But more importantly, or just as importantly, as I learned when we were in Bozeman, Doug, to get the saints together for the fellowship. You can get all the information you want. You can sit at your computer and you can watch a video, but it isn't the same as being in a room full of people who are like-minded, like-hearted, who are searching for something beyond what they have in their local churches. And so that's why, I guess, as a coach, I'm trying to bring a team together. Listen, guys, I don't carry the ball. I can't do what John does. I can't do what Doug does. I can't do what Greg does. But I'm a guy who helps bring this whole thing together. So that's really all I'm playing in this thing is just kind of an organizer, a coach. As all my coaching career, I never scored a touchdown. I never made a tackle. I never made an interception. But I got the ball to the guy who could. I understand the talents that are around us. And these are some great guys who've given their lives to studying what's going on. And one of the things I said to John is I said, listen, John, I don't know if this is going to work, man. I just can't sit around, and I know everybody has end-time eschatologies. I just can't sit around at a rapture conference, and I just can't do that. And John said, no, that's not what it's about. There are people who believe in the rapture. There'll be people who don't believe in the rapture. That is not the focus of this thing. We all understand something seriously is amiss. Something is coming down, and we have to get prepared to be able to do something when this all hits. So I want to Greg Evensen has to do another show at 9 o'clock. So, Greg, I'm going to serve this softball over to you and let you kind of run with it for a minute, and then we'll bring John and Doug into the conversation.
Thank you, Coach. I can tell you, I often said if I could play linebacker like I did in high school under you as coach, I'd have been a Green Bay Packer. But that's in my past, a long time ago. Look, I'm going to say tonight that my background has been for the last 30 years in the field of police enforcement. I consider myself a peace officer and not a police or law enforcement officer, although it could be argued that I had functions in both areas. But I'll tell you that having been a federal Secret Service agent appointee for about 6 months, and I was budget cut, and then on to the Kansas State Troopers and Kansas Marshal and so forth, I saw what was happening in the world firsthand, up close. When I was in the military, firsthand, up close. And I can tell you that early on, Coach, and John and Doug, I can tell you that I realized that I would not get through this if I didn't accept and work with the salvation experience of Jesus Christ. Without that on the battlefield, without that out in the squad car, you're just a target waiting to happen. And so I began teaching other people on survival skills and how to get through what's coming. And I'll shorten it to this point because I realize I'm only just a small part of this. By the way, it's a real privilege to be with you men. I can't tell you the energy that I feel when I'm with real men of God, and folks that understand what's at stake here. And I'll just say this. When I talk to people, it's firsthand experience. It's what's coming. It's what they need to know. If they cannot find their way, they're going to be lost immediately. They will be a victim right up front, and the worst case would be a spiritual victim. But then after that, it's how do I care for my family? I'm the male leader of my family. I got a big clan, and I'm it. If somebody doesn't stand in the gap, what are we going to do when this all comes down? And let me tell you, fellas, this is a freight train coming at us with ISIS in this country, sleeper cells being awakened. There's going to be a real problem. We don't have to go into the Ebola very far to understand that the great controversy now is it airborne or is it not? Well, listen, if you go to a hair field and you go in the lavatory and somebody's just come in from Africa and went through there and washed themselves up at the lavatory or some other area, McDonald's counter or something else, the possibility of getting either the Marburg, which is, of course, after the German research strain of it, or the Ivory Coast, or the Zaire, or the Sudan strain, and the much-vaunted Damascus strain, which may be weaponized. We're looking at unprecedented times, Coach, in our world, unprecedented times in our world history. So what we need to do is invite people to come to hear these great men of God speaking, to hear your rendition of your preparation for this, and certainly what I can offer, and some other speakers as well. I am excited that this is a wonderful follow-up to Bozeman, and it's also a great start onto the next phase before the end comes. God willing, we'll have the time. Thanks, gentlemen.
Before I bring the other two gentlemen in, let me make this very, very important. This is very clear. The last 14 years of my life, I've been screaming, the British are coming, and I've been watching a dead, paralyzed church sit around and watch all this happen. And my heart is on fire when I spoke to John Haller and I heard his story. And I spoke a little bit to Doug and began to understand that there are those who are actually becoming awake and understanding that no matter what it looks like, sitting on our butts in our churches, in the pews, is not the solution to where we are. The solution is not Barack Obama or Mitt Romney or John Boehner. It's not a political, it's a spiritual issue. And until we can begin to help people to understand that, we're just, as my mom used to say, we're just whistling Dixie. So when I spoke to John, he reached out to me actually when he found out we were having another conference. We considered coming together. He began to tell me his story. And John, if you could come in here and just tell everybody, you were one of those evangelifish. You were like so many church leaders that we see across America. something profound happened to you, John. So, John Haller, jump in here, and maybe you can talk a little about, remember, we've got to bring Greg back in because he has to leave at the top of the hour. So, John, just give us a brief opening about who you are, maybe talk a little bit about your birth conference and who's coming and all that kind of stuff.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Coach. You know, I live in Columbus, Ohio area where Dave Daubenmire is, and you don't live around Columbus, Ohio too long before you hear about Coach Dave. And there's some people that, you know, don't like Coach Dave too much, but Coach Dave, from my observation, has always been a real man. I got an email a couple weeks ago now, I guess it was, from a friend of mine down in Florida who listens to Hagmann and Hagmann, and he says, hey, I saw this on Steve Quayle's website, a survey that was done. Would you be interested in a conference in Columbus, Ohio, November 14th and 15th? And I think, Coach, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the initial offering of that was made only to pastors, and the response you got was pretty negligible. So you decided to open it up to the public, and within a day or so, you had 300 people or so that indicated that, yeah, we would love to come to a conference like that in Columbus, Ohio. So I looked at it, I saw the dates, and I thought, folks, this is really a God thing that's happening. What are the odds that the like-minded brothers want to do a conference on the same weekend, in the same town, in the same state, that we had been planning to do it for several months? And, you know, we had just kind of gone out into the public with the dates of our conference and had put our team together. We've met for many, as Doug Woodward can tell you, we've met for many, many hours. So the one thing that I want to say is this is a real God thing here. I'm a trial lawyer by profession. I was an elder, teacher, leader in a large evangelical church here. And for many years, I had become increasingly dismayed at the state of evangelicalism in America. I think it's in an abysmal shape. I think it's clearly in the state that the church in Laodicea was in. It's a mixture of things. Yeah, there's some good things, but there's a lot of cold that's mixed in there. And that we know that Jesus, that was the church that was so distasteful to the Lord that he wanted to spit it out of his mouth. So I've been studying and teaching and warning about the apostasy for many years. That became increasingly uncomfortable to people in the church I was in, and eventually they actually, about a year and a half ago, put me on trial to remove me as an elder because they said I was divisive. And my wife and I talked about it. I decided to resign. We left. We started a small fellowship here in the Columbus area. I help teach. We have a part-time pastor. We're looking at a guy this weekend who may be our full-time pastor, a really solid, discerning guy who rightly divides the Word of God. The one thing that I got very concerned about, though, over those years was just what I saw increasingly weak teaching throughout the evangelical church. And leaders, it was the leaders that didn't seem to care. So, but when you speak out against it, there's a cost. We left the church we were in for almost 30 years. My wife had a very viable ministry to women there. People who we thought were our friends are nowhere to be found in our lives now, and it's been a difficult year and a half, but it's also been very rewarding. We've got a great fellowship of believers. We thought we put live stream package together. We're starting to live stream our services. We'll be live streaming this conference, and then just through sort of happenstance, I met. I'll talk a little bit more about this at the conference, but it's sort of miraculous. Somebody saw me speak at a conference in Myrtle Beach last February that was live streamed. They contacted me. I contacted them. I was out in California a couple months later. We had our first meeting of the group that became the Prophecy Forum, and here we are about 6 months later getting ready to put our first conference on November 14th and 15th in Dublin, Ohio.
You know, John, if I can jump in there for those who are listening, I know there are many out there who are just like me. When I first started to hear about really what's going on in the world, as it was in the days of so shall be at the coming of the Son of Man, I immediately wrote it off. I said, "Oh, that's tinfoil. That's tinfoil hat stuff, man. I ain't going to go anywhere near that stuff." And you know what? The more I began to study it out, and the more I began to look at the evidence, I couldn't get away from it. And so the idea of prophecy to me is not the fact that this whole thing's winding down. Let's pack our bags and sit around and wait to get out of here. But prophecy are signposts, like the old the Twilight Zone. There's a signpost up ahead, and we have guys coming to this conference who read those signposts, and they're going to say to us, "Look, this is happening, and this is happening." Now we have a choice. My approach on has been, I can sit here in my house and hide, or I can stand up and declare and prepare and try to help others. So that's where I kind of, even though I don't really know him, Doug Woodward is probably one of those tinfoil hat guys I would have laughed at 3 years ago, 4 years ago. But Doug, this stuff's real, isn't it?
Absolutely. Hey, first off, it's great to be with you guys, and Doug, thanks for having us on your show. And, boy, the level of energy and conviction in the voices of everyone on this, wow, fantastic. There's quite a number of things that we can talk about if time allows in terms of the formation of the Prophecy Forum and putting on this first conference, but so much of it really relates to, what we've titled the conference, the world turned upside down. And it's because so much has happened, especially in the last 6, 7, 8 months, that speaks of the fact that we're not just in the last days, we're like in the last of the last days. And, there's lots I could say, but I'm cognizant of the fact that Greg's going to leave us. And, Greg, before I get wound up and start talking too much, I think I'm going to hand it back to you and just talk about some of the things that are on your heart that you want to talk about when we're together in Columbus here in about 4 weeks.
Well, thank you, sir. My style is a little bit different. Having been a cop, state trooper, when I walked up to a car, I had to maintain my discipline and decorum. But I tell you, I lose a little bit of that in front of a crowd because there is no way that I can underscore for folks. Now, I meant I lose it in a good way. But they need to understand how serious things are. I don't think there's too many doubters anymore, especially among those who are sensitive to what's going to happen in Dublin. And we're looking forward to that because it will be a one-on-one experience with everybody that's in the audience that I can get across to them in a way that's very personal, along with the rest of you in your own style, that an outline, a very close one, about what we're seeing now, what is immediately coming, why it's coming, the response that is already programmed, that's already trained for by thousands and thousands of police officers across the United States, and we are going to see the fruit of that falling into the harvest basket here pretty quick in terms of what they will do when it becomes absolutely critical to getting through these issues we mentioned before. So, I'm going to have to run here. I got a West Coast show, but I tell you, it is a time for great introspection, spiritually as well as realistically. It's awfully hard, guys, because I'm running into people all over now that it's too much. Deer in the headlights comes to mind. They just can't take much more, and so I have to be very careful, and I know you are as well, to balance reality and what we're dealing with and our interpretation of it with a great sense of hope and promise. Because I'll tell you, in the end of it, everybody that I've ever known, that I ever served with, many of those fellows are gone now, and they're gone on to where? And many of them are in heaven, and others are not. And so I'm saying we must keep that as our theme. At least I do. Our hope of promise, not of despair, not of I'm going to give up. Oh well, whatever happens. No. We're going to go right down the road with Jesus in front of us, leading the way. Thank you guys for letting me be with you. Have a great night tonight. I'll see you in Dublin.
Greg, thank you so very much.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I'm sorry, Doug. I didn't mean to step on you there.
No, you go right ahead. I'm going to again back out. I just Greg is a man's man, and I love the guy. And you know what, Dave, watching him speak in Bozeman was one of the highlights to me. I just what a great guy, and I'm just looking forward to this mix of incredible. I mean, when I read, by the way, folks, the prophecyforum.com, just go to hagmanandhagmann.com and click on the link there, the Prophecy Forum. When I read the bios of Doug Woodward, of course, and John Haller, look, and of course you coach. I'm not even sure I'd be I would be eligible or qualified to wash your cars. I mean, my goodness, what a bunch of talent.
We'd put you on the special teams, Doug. We'd get you a place to play.
All right, brother. Well, will you go ahead and take it away and go ahead and conduct the interview, and I'll just sit back and quietly listen.
Okay, because really, as I said, I'm the coach. I'm not the expert in this thing. You know, we've tried to blend. As we know, there's a Hagmann. I hate to use this term, but there's a Hagmann and Hagmann crowd who know Pastor Langford. We'd love for him to come, and John Kyle, but we're blending together a conference that's already in place, and these guys were kind enough to allow us to meld the two together. Russ Disdar is going to join us. And people on Hagmann and Hagmann are very familiar with who Russ Disdar is. We chose Russ because he lives in Ohio. This conference is in Ohio. Greg is in Michigan. He's just up the road in Michigan. He can come and be a part of it. Hagmann and Hagmann, Doug and Joe are going to come, and they're going to do live broadcasts from the venue. If you can imagine that, question, answers with the audience. We think this is going to be something that's never been done before. Now, here's something that you can do, folks. You can sit home and you can do live streaming, which we have, but I'm going to tell you something. The highlight of the venue out in Bozeman, Montana, was just getting together with 500 like-minded people who were searching for a church and searching for their truth and could look each other eyeball to eyeball and draw strength from each other. Because here's the truth of it is, guys, this thing appears to be winding down. Now, whatever that means, it appears to be winding down. The what's going on in the heavens. I mean, look at the blood moons and ISIS and all that stuff, the pestilence, all that stuff appears to be upon us. But see, what if the period that we're coming into is a much more extended period than what we ever thought it would be? What if this ends up being years, and we would have had the opportunity to have made a difference with what our lives and what we could have done, but we weren't equipped, we didn't have the knowledge, we didn't read the signposts. That's really what this event is all about. And you know what, I look at the clock, we're close to 9, and I think when we come back, I'm just going to kind of hand off a little bit more to John and to Doug and let them talk about who's going to be there and what we're trying to accomplish. And I think they're $59 is all this thing is. I can't believe that they're offering this for $59. And
I've never seen anything like that.
Hold, I think
I got to tell you, Coach.
About,
sorry for talking over you. There's a delay here, Coach. You go ahead. We do not have. We rescheduled. We reprogrammed the clock. We don't have the top of the hour break, just the bottom of the hour.
Cool,
so you just go ahead and go.
Cool.
I mean, so continue.
We're going to bring these people together, and I think the idea of a Hagmann and Hagmann broadcast that all the world can listen to as we're doing it, with studio audience asking questions, and of course there's going to be live streaming and all that stuff going on. This is folks, this is really, really something. And I know that if you're listening to Hagmann and Hagmann, you already have your tinfoil hat. You already understand something is wrong. And Doug, I think I shared with you that somebody told me that 2/3 of the population of the United States is within a day's drive of Columbus, Ohio. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it really is considered the population center of the United States, and so that was one of the reasons why we wanted to do a conference in Columbus, besides the fact that almost no one ever does, other than John Haller's done some small ones. But we wanted to do something that would be attractive to people there's so many big cities in Ohio. Indianapolis isn't very far. Michigan's not far. So it was, strategically something we thought this really makes sense. Let's do our first conference, in the heartland, as it were. And John, who really is kind of one of the core guys in this, is right there. And so we're feeling like this was the right thing to do and the right place to be at that time. So we're very pleased about that.
Space is limited, right, Doug? Space is limited. We're not trying to create a feeding.
Yeah.
We're not trying to create a feeding.
Right.
We're just telling people that there's only about room for about 500 people there. So
that's right.
One in Bozeman filled up very, very quickly, and we believe this one will as well.
That's right.
Now,
as time allows, we'll talk more about the individuals that are going to be there, the speakers and the topics, because it's pretty dramatic in terms of what we're going to be able to assemble.
Before we come to you, Doug, and I'm going to let you kind of run with that one, John, I alluded to it earlier. Just talk a little bit about your experience personally, because I believe there are thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who are listening to us right now who are just so fed up with church. In fact, when we were out at Bozeman, I know Doug would attest to this, that Steve Quayle, when he was speaking, he asked how many people were involved with the local church, and there were 500 people there, and there was a smattering of hands, maybe 10 people that were actively involved with the local church, which is really, really sad, because their eyes are open, and they go to their own church, and they say something to their pastor, and the pastor, he buzzes them off, or he don't want to go there, or they talk to other people, and all of a sudden people begin to walk the other way when they see them coming. There are a lot of people whose eyes are open, and we want to try to be able to reach out to them. And John, if you would, just take a minute and explain from your own standpoint your journey out of this thing that we would call evangelical. I call it evangelifish. How did that all happen for you, Doug or John?
Well, it's taken a while. It's been a long journey. I probably, because of relationships with people and that type of thing, I probably hung in there longer than I should have in hindsight. But, I felt that I had a small flock at the large church. I taught a large adult Bible fellowship. I had a flock of people that I felt responsible for, that I felt I needed to shepherd and care for. Let me back up. I grew up in a evangelical church. I went to a Christian college. I met a great lady there when I was 19 years old. I went on our first date at age 20. Proposed on the third date about 2 months later, and got married the next year. So, and that's been about 40 years ago. So that part of my life has been fantastic, and I spent a lot of time in the church. My father was a pastor. When I was a kid growing up, the church was almost like an extension of the home. It was across the street. I could look over there on Sunday mornings at 3 a.m. I could know that I could look out that window. I could see the light on in my dad's study as he was preparing to preach. And the thing that was it drilled into me through him and the way he lived his life and the way he conducted the church was that the proclamation and preaching of the Word of God was essential to the life of the church, and that God would really handle the increase, that all we needed to do was to be faithful to the Word of God, and God could take care of the rest. But as years went by, I knew that there was one of the prophecies of the end time. My father loved Bible prophecy. I started studying Bible prophecy 40 years ago. I started teaching it pretty regularly about 15 years ago. I've helped organize a few conferences with some fairly well-known speakers here in the Columbus area, national speakers that have taken place here in the Columbus area. But one of the things that I noticed was the inroads that false teaching was making into the church. That started with sort of what I would call the signs and wonders movement that I noticed in the community where I went to college. There was just a crazy group of people that were totally off base, and so much so that people, they believed so much in their word of faith doctrine that people were dying, and people were going to work without their eyeglasses and stuff because they insisted that they were healed. And so I've monitored all along, and I've noticed this decline. There are good people. Dave Hunt and Tom McMahon at the Berean Call wrote a book called The Seduction of Christianity, probably over 25 years ago now. And about 6 years ago, I was actually at a conference in Phoenix, Arizona, and sat down next to Tom McMahon at lunch. And we talked, and he had gone to Ohio State, had a couple degrees from Ohio State. He knew the church that I was in, and I told him that our church had invited one of the emergent church leaders to come speak to our young adults. And my objection to that was not met with, let's just say, warm, fuzzy response. It was sort of like, well, you're not a professional pastor. What do you know? And Tom said, John, when Dave and I wrote The Seduction of Christianity, then it was 20 years ago. When we wrote that 20 years ago, we thought that the church could not deteriorate theologically anymore. It was so bad that Jesus had to come back pretty soon because it just couldn't possibly get worse. But he said, here I sit 20 years later, and the last year, the emergent movement that's come into the evangelical church has taken it so far down so quickly that it's worse than I ever thought. So I tried to take a stand on that. Some of that has not been popular. It has cost me somewhat, but God's faithful. God's brought a great group of believers together. We believe in the mission of getting the message out, so we started posting our videos on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and just type in FB Chapel for Fellowship Bible Chapel, you'll get the stuff that we do each week. We bought good quality camera equipment. We'll be handling the live streaming for the first conference. It's another reason why we chose to do it here in Columbus, since we have the experience with it. And one of the things I've noticed, and I'm kind of going all over the lot here, but one of the things that I've noticed is that people, even unsaved people, instinctively know something is going on in the world right now, and they're searching for answers. Now, I will give you an example. Today, I'm sitting in my office downtown Columbus. If you looked out my window, you look right down on the dome of the Capitol building of the state of Ohio.
Folks, John is an attorney, not a funky attorney. He's an attorney with a very, very powerful law firm in Columbus. I'm sitting there, and my Facebook beeped, and it was a young man. He's in the service. He said, "I watch your prophecy updates." Now, look, I talk about a lot of what I would consider very dark things, negative things, but I talk about that in the context that ultimately we have a hope, the hope that Jesus is going to come and clean up this mess. Until then, Dave is right. We have to occupy until he comes. But this man was saying, I'm struggling with sin. I'm struggling with homosexual feelings. I'm in the service. Can God save me? Can I be saved? How do I get saved? And all this stuff. And I'm saying this is happening on Facebook because a guy watched somebody talking about Bible prophecy. I have no way of explaining this. I get emails from people all over the world that watch our little church. We had 60-some people there yesterday, and they watch what we're doing because we're not slick. We don't have a big show like Joel Osteen or any of those other churches. We just try to be faithful in teaching the Word of God, looking at what's going on in the world, and informing people that they need to get ready. A friend of mine that I've met recently, he refers to it as apocalyptic evangelism. Jesus said that the gospel of the kingdom needs to be preached in the end times. That means that we need as the church to use these events, this disarray, this disconnect, it doesn't seem real feeling to bring people back to the anchor, to the rock, and that's Jesus Christ and His Word and His church and His work that He did for us, and the fact that He's coming back, and we need to get ready, prepared in our own hearts to meet the King. So here I'm sitting here. This man, I don't know who he is. I contacted a fairly well-known Bible prophecy teacher in the San Diego area, gave him the phone numbers, and you can pray for that man. His initials are DH. That God will bring him to Himself. It was an incredible experience, and it's just like, wait a minute, you're not a Christian and you're watching my prophecy update? What is up with that? The other thing that I've noticed is through Facebook
and social media and conferences like this is that God is, I think, calling out his faithful end-time remnant church, and people are finding each other. They're finding each other through Facebook, through conferences, and that type of thing. And I'm telling you, I'm getting contacted by people from all over the world that says, hey, I saw you teach. Do you know a good church that I could go to here in, let's say, Colorado? I need a church in Colorado. Well, but I just think it's Doug and Dave and Greg, who's now gone, but I think it's really a God thing that God's bringing a lot of his people together. And I wholeheartedly endorse what Dave said, that part of the reason for a conference like this, the live stream will be great, but the fellowship with other believers, to know that there are other people out there that are seeing these things, that understand that something is going on, and what's going on is different. It's not the same as it was, and so we're gonna do a few things at the conference. Doug Woodward can talk a little bit more about it, but one of my, I guess, visions, or one of the things I would like to accomplish is, one, inform people of what the Scripture says is going to happen, and then relate it to the things that are going on in the world. And as I sit down to do my prophecy update, I'm sure, Doug Hagmann, you have the same problem, is sometimes there's so much that you don't even know where to begin. In fact, I titled one of my prophecy updates recently, I don't even know where to begin, because there is so much happening that's prophetically relevant that Jesus told us would be in the end times. And I'll finish with this. One of the things that we know, I'll give you an example, two things, and then I'll be quiet for a little bit. We know that when Jesus came the first time, some of the prophecies that had been existent for a long time were fulfilled with the announcement of the birth of John the Baptist, and then the birth of Jesus, and that type of thing. And then at the end of Jesus' life, as Jesus grew and began his ministry, more prophecies were fulfilled. But by most estimates, about 60% of the prophecies related to Messiah's first coming were fulfilled in the last week of his life, leading up to his crucifixion and then resurrection. 60%. What that means is that there was an exponential increase in the fulfillment of the prophecies related to Messiah's first coming. And one of the things that I've learned over the years, there's a man who's helped mentor me named Jacob Prash, who uses the way a Middle Eastern Hebrew would look at the Scriptures, is the pattern in Scriptures. What happened at the time of Jesus' first coming will be what's happening at the time of his second coming. And so if there was an acceleration in the fulfillment of Bible prophecy at his first coming, what we should expect is a acceleration in the fulfillment of Bible prophecy at his second coming. And I took that, I taught on that about a year and a half ago at a conference I did, little conference, my co-pastor, Mike Clapham, and I did down in Florida. And we're nobody. We had 125 people show up because people know that something is going on, and they're looking for answers. Unfortunately, by and large, they are not getting it in most evangelical churches. The churches that will talk about this stuff are few and far between. So when we started our church, one of the things we said is we're going to talk about Bible prophecy a lot, because this is, we think, the time. This is the time to be talking about that. And I used a good friend of mine, a pastor, he had mentioned a video he saw that was a pretty good picture of what's going to happen. And I used part of that at the end of my prophecy update that I did. I guess it was just yesterday. It seems like it was a long time ago. And it was a picture of the tsunami that happened on Boxing Day in 2004 in the Indian Ocean area in Asia, and particularly what was going on in Thailand. And what happened was that there was an earthquake. People something happened to shake people up. But what happened in the beach communities, particularly this one in Thailand, was that the water then drained out of the bay. The boats landed on the ground. Rocks and coral that was usually underwater was exposed. And so what happened was people were walking around, and there's video of this, walking around going, wow, look at that. Isn't that we don't usually get to see this great stuff here, the rocks and the fish and the starfish and everything. You have to snorkel usually to do this. But so they're out there walking around the rocks in the bay. And then you see somebody go, hey, what's that? And they pan the camera across the horizon in this giant white wave. And they go, what is that? Is that, no, it's not is that a tsunami? No, it couldn't be a tsunami. And here it comes. And the people, you see them walking around the rocks, and you know they're dead. You know they're not going to survive the rushing onslaught that's coming. Now, some people, they saw, the locals especially, they understood what was happening. And when they saw that white cap, those people turned and they fled. They ran for higher ground. Folks, that's a picture of our world. There is a tsunami of judgment that's coming. And you need to be prepared and understand that it's coming and what to do in response. And so that's part of what we're going to try to accomplish at this conference. Give people the knowledge and the understanding, but also some practical things that they can do. So now I've talked for a little while. I'll turn it over to Doug Woodward.
Well, that's great, John. You're always a hard act to follow, I'll tell you. It's the conviction and the level of understanding you have is always it's really inspiring to me. I love to listen to John's talks, and those that haven't heard him before, you're in for a treat. I will tell you that. There's so many issues that we've brought up and talk about. One of the main issues I'll go back to first is the issue of community, the issue of how many believers that are attracted to the subject of Bible prophecy, of eschatology, that come to conferences, Bible prophecy conferences. So many feel alienated from the church because, by and large, churches and pastors, they view prophetic subjects as divisive, as subjects that they don't really want to talk about, either because they view them as too arcane, perhaps they're unable themselves as pastors to grapple with the issues, but a lot of it is that they don't want to deal with the issues. They may perceive that it's too much of a supernatural issue, and they would rather not confront people in the church with the reality of supernatural things. And the fulfillment of Bible prophecy is one of the most supernatural of elements, and it frightens some people. And so, and what's ironic is John and I have talked about this, is that when the time is, right now, there's probably, sometimes it's like 10 or 12 major themes that run, that are really the story of Bible prophecy, and all of those issues are all in play right now. And despite the fact that you've got these incredible, just monster kinds of issues going on in the world, the church has never been less interested in talking about Bible prophecy than it is right now. And that is one of the most ironic of ironies. And so you have this sort of dichotomy. You have the majority of evangelical churches are in what is known as the emergent church, or in mega churches. Not all churches are this way, but so many of the most popular, the largest, the most well-known churches are this way. They do not talk about the coming of the kingdom of God. They have more or less deserted some of the traditional doctrines of, like, the Reformation, of the doctrines of atonement, the deity, the uniqueness of Jesus Christ, the pending judgment, an apocalypse that is coming, like that tidal wave. There is nothing that's going to stop it. the priority of the Word of God, the infallibility of the Scripture. So many of these things that were once called the fundamentals about 110 years ago, these are issues that have been deserted by traditional evangelicals, and increasingly so over the last 20 years. And it is sad, and it's really a heinous act of disobedience and desertion for the evangelical church to be walking away from these matters. And so you've got so many believers, and there are really thousands and thousands of them across this country. I wish I could say millions, and I don't believe that there are millions, but there certainly are tens of thousands that are very fascinated and inspired by and actively looking for the return of Jesus Christ. And just as we talked about the fact that when Steve Quell asked this question, Bozeman, there was only a handful out of about 500 that raised their hands that indicated that they are interested or rather involved in a local assembly. It is absolutely one of the key attributes of this audience that they don't feel comfortable because they believe in the supernatural, they believe in the coming of the kingdom of God, they believe in miracles, they believe that these things are happening right now, and they are not feeling that confirmed by the leadership in their churches. I was fortunate enough to submit, and L.A. Marzulli, our friend L.A. Marzulli, published an article this week in his e-zine. My article is called Filling the Void, Prophecy Buffs Need Community Too. And it's very much right on this subject of the nature of why it's critical that we find a sense of community, of being together, whether it's presence, being in person with one another, which we really do need to be as much as we can, but it's feeling a sense of community and of a movement, that there is a revival, at least amongst the remnant, however large or small that remnant ends up being, that there is a movement of the Spirit of God, and that we need to find that, and we need to be a part of that is a key way in which the Spirit of God manifests himself, that we are in communion with one another, but also with the Father and with the Son by being together and in community. And so anyway, you might want to check that out in L.A. Marzulli's magazine, and it is really one of the backbone reasons why we formed the Prophecy Forum several months ago, and we wanted to do several conferences a year, of which the Columbus Conference is the first conference. And so anyway, I really want to highlight that and emphasize that, because that provides one of the key rationales for why we are doing what we are doing, and the conviction we have about its importance. So anyway, having said that, Dave, I should take a breath. I can obviously talk more about the speakers and who's going to be there, and talk about the issues, but Doug Hagmann, you might want to give us a little sense of timing and kind of what we should do in the time we have left.
Well, I'll tell you what, and thank you, Doug, and Coach and John. I mean, this is fascinating. As far as timing is concerned with tonight's program, I just reset everything to we've got until the top of the hour, and so we're good on that. But if I can just interject one thing here about what we're talking about. You had mentioned something. I just don't know where to begin. I think John might have mentioned that. And I've got to tell you something. Yesterday, I had a conversation with the editor of Canada Free Press, Judy McLeod, and I told her for the first time in writing for Canada Free Press and writing articles in a decade, first time in a decade, I had writer's block, not because of lack of news and headlines, but because of the serious nature and the enormity of the headlines of today. Now, having said that, and how this all connects to the Prophecy Conference, I will say this. Folks, I believe, as these gentlemen do, that we are closing in on the last days of the last days of the last days. And of all people, Coach Dave Daubenmire, I mean, we need a coach. We need in-house counsel and of course, an evangelical. We need Doug Woodward, an author, speaker, researcher, spiritual. I mean, we need everybody here to come together. And ladies and gentlemen, look, we're going to be there. Joe and I are going to be there. And we're so humbled by being asked to be there. But I'll just say this: if we don't know if December is going to be it, January is going to be it. So if you have the ability, if you're within a day's drive, please make this a priority, because I know that the people who are going to be here at this conference, I would do everything I can possibly do, and this is not a sales pitch. This is a plea for salvation, for knowledge. I am so inspired by these gentlemen talking tonight. Look, we're going to learn, and we're going to for the fellowship. The fellowship is important in the days like this. I cannot say anything beyond that. If there was nothing else that I'm going to do between now and the end of the year, this would be it. Because you don't know who you're going to meet that you haven't spoken before to network. You just don't know, or what that one piece of information you're going to learn by being there, whether it's a sidebar conversation, Attorney Haller, or whatever. Look, do what you have to do. Make the sacrifice, if possible, to be there. And if you need any kind of assistance, whatever we can provide in terms of Joe and I, whatever we can provide in terms of motivation, man, just let us know. But Coach Dave, I'm going to turn it back over to you. You take it wherever you want to take us, but we have so many current events that are coming into play.
Oh,
We've got
goodness.
so many professional. I mean, I looked at this. I looked at the update for the Prophecy Forum, and I'm looking at the presenters. Look, Greg Evensen, Russ Dizdar. I mean, my goodness, Mr. Woodward, John Haller, and it goes on and on and on. Wow, to put everything in order mentally, yeah. This is much needed.
See, Doug,
Coach,
here was my. If you remember when we started this show at the beginning, I was talking about when I was up with Greg Evensen at his place, and I said, Greg, listen, we're paralyzed. We are paralyzed. We look at prophecy and we say, oh, well, there isn't anything that we can do about it. Now, listen, fellas, the Lord told us to occupy until He returns, which tells me Daddy's coming home. And, when I was a little kid, when Daddy came home, things changed when Daddy came home. And rather than us sit around and saying, oh, woe is me, and how bad can it get, prophecy has become so negative and so debilitating and so I give up. That's not what it's supposed to be. As I said, God has given us these signposts that those of us who understand what's going on, that understand the times in which we live, and know what it is that Israel must do. We are given prophecy to spur us to action. And I often tell people this. They say, Coach, I hear it all the time. Coach, come on, quit fighting so hard for the country and America and just get people saved, yada, 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 yada. And I want to scream, because certainly we want to get people saved, but the idea that I might have the opportunity, number one, to slow this juggernaut down. I certainly can't stop it. None of us can stop it. What's going to happen is going to happen. But one of the worst things to ever get is get to the end of something and realize that maybe you could have done something earlier. You could have slowed it. If you drive up your house driveway tonight and your house is on fire, do you sit there and look at your house burn and say, well, that's how it's going to be, just going to get worse? Or do you grab a stinking hose and so I believe that prophecy is designed for firemen to get the hose and understand, because the day is coming, brothers, if the eastern sky doesn't split and Jesus doesn't call the believers home, the reality of it is there's going to be hell to pay here on earth. And there are some of us who have our eyes open and understand what's going on, and wouldn't it be magnificent to be prepared that when the calamity hits, we're able to help people walk through it no matter how long it might last. Now, I tell everybody about the rapture. I don't even argue about the rapture, because I said mine could come tonight. I could not wake up in my bed tonight and it could be over for me. But it's a signpost that something is about to happen, but it is to spur us to action, not to cause us to sit along like cordwood, stack ourselves up like cordwood, and wait for the bus to come and pick us up. We're supposed to be actively involved in expanding the gospel of the kingdom. That's why I want to get involved. That's why I wanted to bring a prophecy conference, not a woe is me, as you say, Doug, not a fear porn or whatever you guys call that, but just say, listen, this stuff is coming. Let's build an ark. Let's help people be prepared. That's where my heart is. Now I'm going to serve it either to John or Doug, whoever wants to walk and talk maybe a little bit about some of the guys that are coming, or go wherever you want to. My goodness, look at the times and what's going on around us. It would be so easy to retreat inside my bunker and hide from the world. But brothers, those of us who feel the Spirit of God, that's not our response. Our response is to declare and prepare.
Right.
Well, let me talk a little bit about. Go ahead, Doug.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, John, if you want to talk, either way. I was going to say, if you want to talk some about the speakers, I could talk about the issues,
I'll do a couple,
or vice versa.
Do a couple.
Okay. Go ahead. Okay.
A couple guys that are coming. Of course, Bill Salas will be there, who has a new book out on the prophecy of Elam, and has been a very well-known popular speaker on the prophecy of Psalm 83 and how that fits in. And one of the things that we hope to do is to at least do a session. We have some panels that we'll be doing to talk through sort of a scenario so people can understand how this thing might unfold. Now, we're not, I don't think any of us is a prophet, but we have studied the prophecies in great detail, and some more than others, and we're going to talk about that. So when you see things going on, because right now it doesn't, it's Russia, it's China, North Korea, it's things are going on everywhere that are just very, very troubling. You have drought here, disease, pestilence, and nobody ever talks about the economy, and the economy's probably sitting on the brink of big trouble. Is the best way to say it. So Bill Salas will be with us, great speaker, author, writer, worth listening to. Another guy that will be joining us, part of the Prophecy Forum group of directors, is Doug Krieger. Doug wrote a book with Doug Woodward and Dean McGriff called The Final Babylon. He also has a book out called Signs in the Heavens. And Doug is really one of the I'm not sure how to describe it, Doug Woodward. Doug Krieger, if you're on Doug Krieger's personal email list, you're going to get like a small book a week just from the things that he writes and the way he pulls things together. And we kind of joke about that a little bit, that, Doug Krieger's emails are taxing the size limit of my inbox. But it's all good stuff. The man has a real gift, and he's very bold to proclaim it, and that thing. So those are two of our speakers. Doug Woodward, take it away.
Yeah, well, I'll comment. Bill Salas, of course, needs very little introduction because he's been one of the top speakers on these topics during the past, 4 or 5 years at least, and perhaps longer. Doug Krieger is a friend. He's a co-author. He and I have written, The Final Babylon, as John mentioned. one of the chapters we adapted to Tom Horn's book, Blood on the Altar, in that, which does a parallel between what happened in Germany in the 1930s with Adolf Hitler and the confessions of the Catholic and Evangelical Church in Germany, and how it leads us to believe that similar things are happening in the United States, in which Christianity is getting sucked up into the whole issue of governing and society, and a failure to really stand opposed to what's happening in our society and in our culture. So we talk about that. But anyway, Krieger is he's got like 50 years experience in the study of Bible prophecy, and so he is probably a walking encyclopedia on the whole subject. I mean, and frankly, he knows everybody. He has met during his lifetime many experts that have gone on, scholars that have gone on to be with the Lord, and yet he has vivid recollections of discussions and meetings with them. So he's an incredible resource that we have on our team, and he will certainly speak on a number of subjects. He has a new book coming out called The Two Witnesses, and he will talk about that. He will talk about the relationship of the church and Israel, and it's going to be it's so vital right now, because that is an area of increased hostility. Once again, many evangelicals deserting what has been a very strong affinity and alliance with the state of Israel. Not that there's a misunderstanding. We as Christians believe that the state of Israel has gathered in unbelief, but not that there aren't many believers. There are, but things are going to be heating up more in the Middle East, and anyway, Krieger will be talking about the relationship between the church and Israel. So other speakers, or having thrown in my 2 cents on those two guys. Another director in the Prophecy Forum is Gonzo Shimura. Gonz, as we call him, has probably touched more lives because of the films that he has produced, Age of Deceit and Age of Deceit 2. Age of Deceit has been downloaded well over 3 million times, so it has reached, and he has, several, perhaps, I think it's well over 10,000 members on his YouTube channel that pay attention. He manages, he and his sidekick Basil, they do Canary Cry Radio, and they do a great job there. They tend to speak to the younger generation, of which I am no longer a part. Neither Haller and I are practically contemporaries. I think we were born about a month apart. But anyway, the Gons speaks very effectively to a younger generation, and so he will be there talking about some recent research he has done in the area of sort of you might say secret weapons, what's going on in Israel and the United States in terms of those kinds of weapons that could be unleashed and what appear to be wars that are happening, will be happening perhaps very soon. So he will be there. Obviously, John, myself, Hagmann and Hagmann, Greg Evensen, Dave Daubenmire, Russ Dizdar is another speaker who, Russ is, I count him as a close personal friend. He has had an enormous impact upon this country and even overseas now. He's been in ministry for well over 2 decades, I believe it is. And he's one of the most accomplished, I guess you'd say, warriors in spiritual warfare. Has a background in as a chaplain in police departments, and is now a leading resource that police departments use for helping to train them on the phenomenon of satanic ritual abuse. And you would not know this. Russ is such a kind, gentle soul that you would not know that if he comes into the room and someone has a problem with demonic influence or possession, the demons are not going to be happy to see Russ Dizdar. He is such a powerful force for spiritual good, and so Russ will be preaching and teaching there, and he's just a terrific speaker and teacher. I'm sure he's been on Doug. He's been on your show quite a number of times, I know.
Oh, yeah.
And he will be with us as well. And so, and then I think it's last. I think I've covered everyone else. But Gary Winkleman, who's also one of our directors, has not been a spokesperson, hasn't written books, but he has some of the most fascinating life experiences, which we've been talking about. Doug, sometime you may want to have Gary on and talk about his experiences when he was in Moscow, not long after the Berlin Wall fell. He was actually working for Bob Haldeman, who was formerly the head of Nixon's chief of staff during the Watergate affair. And Winkleman was in Moscow for a couple of years and was there when the Russian mob was basically becoming more and more powerful. And so we've done a number of shows already, just a little podcast that we're doing on issues associated with Russia, and more to come. One of the fellows that worked for Gary turned out to be one of the CIA's leading operatives in Russia, and he has written a book, and he reported to Gary when Gary was there at the major hotel that was the center for the sort of economic development and direction that the United States was providing to the new Russian Republic when Yeltsin was there in power. And anyway, fascinating stories. He and I are going to talk more about what's happening in the Ukraine and what's going on with Putin, the whole issue of Gog and Magog, how it fits into the biblical scenario, and how these current events all tie into that. So he's quite an expert, and the other individuals that he and I are talking with really have just a tremendous amount of depth in this area, and so it's pretty incredible information. So we will cover some of that as well. So I think, John, did I miss anybody in terms of the key speakers that are at the conference?
No, I think we covered it. If I could just add one more thing.
Sure.
I would really, as much as I want people to come and be there, or if they can't, watch on live stream and that type of thing, I'd really like to ask the people out there to be in prayer about the conference. I know that that's a big concern of Doug Woodward's as well. I'm confident as of Dave Daubenmire's. We're actually the conference will start at 1, but the doors will open at 11, and we've set aside a space where if people want to come early and fellowship, or just come early and pray about the conference, that God's hand will be on it, that we'll do what the Lord would have us do through the conference. One of the things when we left our church last year and we got together and decided, okay, we're going to start a Bible study, but we needed a place. So we had a prayer meeting. Next day we had a place to meet, and then because of some disputes going on between the owner of the building and the city of Upper Arlington, they told us we couldn't meet there anymore as a church. And they said, you have to stop immediately, cease and desist. And so we had another prayer meeting, we prayed, and the next day we had a better space. So I've really become a big believer in the power of prayer, and that God will respond to the pleas and requests of his people. So we would ask people to be in prayer for the conference that's coming up.
Very important. Yeah, very important. Go ahead, Coach.
John, if I could, I listened to your video, your audio that was put up on the website today, and just take a minute if you could, because this is really, the Pope came out today and said that we have to recognize the fact that gay people have a lot to offer the church. I mean, we see the church in general really beginning to capitulate to the whole gay agenda. Listen to your audio, and you really zeroed in on that, John. Could you take a few minutes and explain to people that this is a far deeper issue than what we even understand it to be?
Well, this is a very deep spiritual issue, and I have tried to warn my congregation or the people that come to our church to listen to our teaching that they need to prepare themselves for what's coming, because this thing is a juggernaut. I am convinced and I address this, I don't say weekly, and I'm not against, I don't hate homosexual people. I believe that, they need to repent and be saved, just like I needed to repent and be saved. But one of the things that Jesus said was, in the end times, he used two examples. And again, the pattern in Jewish scripture, if Jesus gives us a pattern to look for, then we ought to look for that pattern. One was the days of Noah, but the other in the same passage in Luke chapter 17 was the days of Lot. And what was going on, go read what was going on in Sodom before Lot was rescued, taken by force by the angels, and taken out of Sodom. And to really get the perfect picture of that, you have to go over to 2 Peter chapter 2. And it talks about that righteous Lot's soul was tortured, tormented by the licentious behavior that he saw going on. So I tell people is you need to be prepared to act like Lot. And your reaction should be that this bothers you. And it does feel oppressive, and it's coming, but it's one of the ways I think the church can be the church. I personally think that at some point Christians are going to lose their jobs over this issue. I went to a conference. I was told, I'm a lawyer, I'm a trial lawyer in a big law firm, that if you want business in the future, you guys are going to have to go to these big corporations, and you're going to have to prove that you're diverse. And the sole thing they're going to look at, and this is a diversity person that's telling us, that's her specialty, the sole thing they're going to look at is how many out in the open LGBT lawyers you have. And if you don't have 10% or more, then they're going to assume that your firm isn't committed to diversity. And not only do you have to have them there, you have to be committed to their agenda. And this is difficult for Christians. It should be difficult. It's a difficult world to live in and navigate. And so maybe it's a time that the church is going to have to be the church, that we're going to have to prop each other up and help support each other through some tough times because of the bad conduct that's going on around us. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but in terms of legal challenges and that type of thing, the issue is pretty much lost in the courts here in America. I mean, they've changed the definition of what marriage always was, and I believe, but I think there's a bigger issue involved, Dave, and maybe this is what you were talking about that I talked about yesterday. Ultimately, the goal of these people is to remove the distinctions between men and women. Now, I'm sure if I brought my wife in on this conversation, she would stipulate that men and women are different. But God created us different. And to refuse to recognize that is deeply disturbing. It is a slap in the face of God. And the homosexual behavior, as it increases in a culture, Paul in Romans chapter 1 said, eventually God gives them up to a reprobate mind. So when I talk a lot about deception. I talk a lot about people doing things in the world and culture that don't make sense because they're deceived. They're deceived by their own lust. They're deceived by the enemy. And this deception will operate on many, many levels in the end times. It'll operate in geopolitics. And really, do I have to say anything about, do you think there's deception afoot in geopolitics? It'll operate in our culture as people attack and destroy long-standing moral standards. and it will operate in the church, where what we thought were shepherds will depart and fall away from the truth. Now, I talk a lot about that. It's not popular. People say, I don't understand. We just have to be relevant, culturally relevant, and that type of thing. I disagree. Preach the word, and God and the Holy Spirit is certainly capable of overcoming my frailties, my inabilities to get his message out and to use the Holy Spirit to prompt people. But I'm the stuff in the church is what troubles me the most. The watering down of the gospel. I talked about this yesterday, that there's this push now for the social gospel. Well, we'll just feed people. It's so interesting, God's timing on this. There's a great article in Master Seminary Journal about this right now, about the social gospel. It's the current issue. You can find it online, Master Seminary. It's a great article. I think everybody should read it to understand what's really going on in the churches to undermine the gospel. And somebody sent me that article, and I was going to talk about it yesterday. And we also had somebody come yesterday. We had two pastors come from Malawi. And one of the reasons and I'd heard a story about a pastor from Malawi, and it turns out that he was one of the guys who was at our church yesterday. About 10 years ago, he came to America, and he said, folks, yeah, we need water trucks, we need food, we need houses, don't send us that stuff. We're dying in Africa. Send us preachers of the gospel, because we need to be saved. And that's what we desperately need. We are people on the edge of eternity, and we need to be saved. We need to be right with the Lord. That's the priority. So, yeah, all that stuff is good, but I think we lost sight of the central core message of what the church is to be about.
Wow. Coach?
Well, Doug, here's what you've been really, really generous with your time tonight, and we could get into a lot of issues that are going on, and we could do all that stuff. I think that probably at this point we probably will just, from our standpoint, just kind of close down where we are. Let Doug talk a little bit about how to register and all that kind of stuff. What the weekend's going to be like. You and Joe are going to be there, and you're going to broadcast live from it. And listen, this is I just believe this is so important for people to become equipped. We know that there are thousands, millions maybe that are awake, and we just want to give an opportunity for people to be able to get together and be able to fellowship and make connections and just glean from each other. The gospel is the answer for the problems we face in America, and the media wants to turn us to politics and to Republicans and Democrats and all that other kind of stuff, when we all know that is not the answer. So those who have their eyes open, we're just trying to create a venue where we can all come together and try to be of one accord. So, Doug, maybe you can kind of close it down here and with how they register. I know it's at
Sure.
the website there. And close
right,
it down there.
yeah. Well, our website, it's kind of hit some square in the eyes if they go look at www.theprophecyforum.com, and you can register there on the website. There's obviously lots of information about the particulars of the conference. The main thing, we'll just kind of go over the basics. It's Friday and Saturday, November 14 and 15 in Dublin, Ohio, at the Dublin Community Center. The doors open at 11. The conference will kick off at 1 o'clock. John Haller will kick off the conference at 1 o'clock. We will have sessions. We'll have a total of 16 sessions that will be live streamed. Total of 25 sessions overall. We have 2 great rooms. One holds about 300, one holds about 200, and we will be sort of double teaming, sessions so that individuals will have choices as to which sessions they wish to go to. Anyone that comes to the conference will get a discount on the DVD set that we will have, hopefully within less than 2 months after the conference has been completed. And so there'll be a discount on that, whether you come live and in person, which we strongly encourage you to do if at all possible, or if you live stream. There'll be a discount on that set. But the sessions will go until about 9 or 9:30, and then the sessions on Saturday, the doors will open. Let's see, I'm double checking to make sure I've got this right. Doors will open at 8 a.m. on Saturday, and the first session will be at 8:30. We will complete wrap everything up about 8:30 Saturday night, and so we'll have again, pretty full day I'll have a completely full day on Saturday, and about an 8-hour day on Friday. So it'll be very very full of of great information and great speakers. Let's see, what else can I tell you? The price is $54.95 if you are attending in person. If you are a couple, we have a special price for couples of $79.95. And again, these prices basically allow us to more or less break even because we're bringing in speakers and covering the cost of their expenses and so forth. And so it's not like this is a big money making opportunity, as I think you alluded to earlier, Dave. It's pretty cheap. It's probably about half price relative to what other conferences typically are charging for for the event. So we're trying to be mindful. We want folks to be able to come. We don't want price to really be a hindrance. And we're hopeful that we have really a number of hotels that information is available on our website where you can book rooms. I think it's the Hilton Garden Hotel, John, if I'm not mistaken, where we have a block of rooms with a discount. And
That's right.
It's a pretty good price. I think it's a $99 price, includes breakfast. And so it should be, economically okay as well. And then there are other hotels if you prefer one of those others. So anyway, the accommodations should be good. And yeah, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
If I could throw this in there, I want people to understand this, that from our experience at Bozeman, folks, you're going to get real contact with Russ Dizdar. You're going to get to really talk to Greg Evensen if that's what you would like to do. It's not going to be a situation where
right.
Russ Dizdar is going to come in and speak, and then they're going to get him off stage real quick and get him away from everybody. This is the one in Bozeman and the one that we're going to have here will be a great give and take with people. You get to talk to Doug Hagmann and Joe Hagmann, and you'll get to get up close and personal ministry fellowship with the speakers. Now, you understand what I'm saying, but it's not like you go to some of these mega churches, the pastor preaches and you never see him again. They take him off into the hinterland and he hides someplace. The speakers will all be around. They'll be there to answer your questions, to share with you, to share materials and all that kind of stuff. And I know from my experience at Bozeman, it was just a great, satisfying time for everybody that was there. And we hope
really appreciate you bringing that up, because that absolutely is one of my favorite aspects of the conferences I typically am involved in, and certainly this one will be where we really will be spending time. Those of us that have some books that you can obtain if you'd like, we will be there, and we will. I usually don't even eat. I usually sit at my table during the breaks and during lunch and dinner and talk to people and get into some pretty extended conversations. So I've had the privilege to write quite a number of books. So if anyone's familiar with my books and want to come and talk about those, that would be just fantastic. And I really do my best to make myself available, and I know Doug Krieger does as well. Sometimes we have to get Doug to not, he likes to preach all the time, and so sometimes we have to tell him, no, Doug, just sit down and let people ask you questions, okay? But he, we're all are going to be eager to do that. So thanks for pointing that out, Dave. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, one of the things I didn't point out is Doug and Joe are going to be there, and we don't know how this is going to come off, but we're thinking about a live studio audience, with the studio audience being able to ask Russ Dizdar specific questions, or ask Doug Woodward specific questions questions and to be able to hear those broadcasts, all those things that you wanted to ask that you never got a chance, you couldn't get through on the phone lines. You're going to be right there in the same room with them and be able to ask the questions, and it'll go around the world on Hagmann and Hagmann. So we think that it's a great opportunity, just a great fellowship for people to get together and get to know each other a little better.
Fantastic.
Well, that's great.
Gentlemen, I just want to thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to add one more thing real quick. And then Sunday morning, some of the speakers, we're going to be doing the Sunday morning service at Fellowship Bible Chapel. We meet up in Lewis Center just north of Columbus, and people are invited welcome to stay over for that also. We just ask that you maybe send me an email, the john.haller54@gmail.com, john.haller54@gmail.com, so we can make sure we have enough space for everybody, because we have a small facility. But we're looking forward to a great weekend and getting to meet everybody face to face, and looking for what the Lord's going to do through this conference.
Amen.
Wow. Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for your time tonight. Coach Dave, thanks for setting all this up for tonight. You did a great job. Mr. Haller, Attorney Haller, thank you so very much. Mr. Woodward, I'm looking forward very much to meeting you at the conference.
Thank you.
Love your work. I got to tell you, big fan. And so it's going to be a great time. Really appreciate your gift of time tonight, gentlemen. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.
God bless you, Doug. We appreciate you being so willing to let us get the word out. We know it's going to be a great event, and people get to come and shake hands with Doug Hagmann and Joe Hagmann. That's worth a price right there.
Yeah, you're right. All right, gentlemen, we're up against it. Going to cut you loose. Thanks again, and Coach, we'll be in contact.
God bless you.
Very soon. All right.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Oh, folks, what a great, wow. I'm so excited about this conference. In fact, I talked to Joe about it over the weekend. We're both just so excited. We've had such a great time. We had such a great time at Bozeman, and we're looking forward to meeting all of you, or as many of you as possible. Back, folks, to hour number 3 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Just one Hagmann tonight. That's me, Doug Hagmann, flying solo, so doing the best I can, operating 3 computers, 1 microphone with 2 hands. And it's interesting, Joe had some minor surgery today, not exactly expected, but he's going to be just fine, back in the co-captain's chair tomorrow. So want to just wish him a speedy recovery, actually ordering him to have a speedy recovery. Nothing serious, nothing life-threatening. It was just an issue, back issue type thing. So that's great. And I'll tell you what, folks, if you're just tuning in this third hour, many do, want to tell you that we had for the first, really for the first couple of hours, we had Coach Dave Daubenmire, Doug Woodward, John Haller, talking about the Columbus, Ohio conference. And Joe and I are going to be there. What we're going to try to do is set up the try to live broadcast from there. And as a matter of fact, perhaps with Russ Dizdar or maybe even a panel. And this is going to be something new for us. We have the equipment. We are ready to go. We just have to plays out well. A couple of items here I want to get into. It's interesting. I don't know how many of you have seen this. A commission says Christian business owners should leave religion at home. Now, folks, Todd Stearns writes about this at Fox News, but this is a case of brainwashing Christians, and it's in a third state, meaning Kentucky. There is a trend developing. Now, you heard what Coach Daubenmire had said, and you heard what the gentleman, other gentleman, John Haller and Doug Woodward, said earlier. Look, the Human Rights Commission in Lexington, Kentucky, has a very bone-chilling message. If you're a Christian in Kentucky and you own a business and you refuse to serve LGBT organizations, you're told to, well, you're going to be in trouble. Executive Director Raymond Sexton said, you better leave your religion at home, basically, or, and I'm paraphrasing, or you could find yourself in a legal battle. On Tuesday last week, a Lexington Human Rights Commission hearing examiner issued a recommended ruling that the owner of a T-shirt company violated a local ordinance against sexual orientation discrimination. Now, think about this. Just take a second and let that sink in. A Christian business owner attend diversity training, folks, because of his religious beliefs. Aside from being a very frightening concept, this sets a very dangerous precedent. This Sexton of the Human Rights Commission in Lexington, Kentucky, this executive director, Raymond Sexton, calls this a landmark decision and a very important ruling for them. It was concluded that Blaine Adamson of Hands On Originals broke the law 2 years ago, back in 2012, by declining to print shirts promoting the Lexington Pride Festival. The Gay and Lesbian Services Organization subsequently filed a complaint. See, folks, the homosexual community is not just content to say, fine, you know what, you don't want to serve us, we're going to go elsewhere. No. They are going to rip you down, take you down, with the assistance of the United States, or the states in this case. Alliance Defending Freedom, a law firm that specializes in religious liberty cases, represented Adamson. No one should be forced by the government or by another citizen to endorse or promote ideas which they disagree. I'm going to tell you flat out right now, I will go to jail. I will go to jail before I am forced to promote something that I find antithetical to Christianity or my religious beliefs. And you can damn well bet there will be one empty seat in any diversity training class, because I will not attend a diversity training class. Ever. Ever. Because you see, tolerance of evil is just plain evil. This is how far down this road we are, folks. I just want to make sure everyone understands this again. Lexington, Kentucky, a T-shirt company, Blaine Adamson of Hands On Originals. Well, the Lexington Human Rights Commission said, hey, you broke the law in 2012 by declining to print shirts promoting the Lexington Pride Festival. So, here's what you're going to do. You are going to attend diversity training. Oh, and by the way, you're gonna print the shirts. The law in Lexington is pretty clear, according to Sexton. You cannot discriminate against people on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, regardless of what your beliefs are. If you have a public business, then that's how you have to operate. Well, it seems to me that if a Christian business owner does not want to do business with a LGBT organization, That should be their right. But no, these people, these progressive, communist, Satanist, Luciferians, don't feel that way. Should an LGBT business choose not to do business with a church, that should be their right as well. Sexton admits there's a conflict. Of course there's a conflict. It's a spiritual and moral conflict, and now it's a legal conflict. Folks, if you own a business, a growing number of businesses are being that are owned by hardworking Christian owners are caught in the crosshairs of a culture war. No, it's not just a culture war. It is a war between good and evil. Plain and simple. End of story. When I just Coach Dave Daubenmire and I were talking earlier, I want to just touch on something here. He had said something very important, folks, and I really wanted to drive this point home. Really wanted to inform. This to me is so important. I was doing some research today, a lot of research, and actually, I ended up going down a few roads that took me deep down the rabbit hole. But Paul McGuire was on last week with us, and I love Paul McGuire. He's a great guy. He's got a lot of great insight, and of course his new book, Standing Down Goliath. But he points something out. He pointed something out last week, and I don't know how many people really caught this. America and Europe. There's this illusion that reality is defined by what we can perceive in 3 dimensions. But that reality, folks, is being shattered like the mirror reflection of Alice in Wonderland dancing on a black and white checkered tile floor. The social engineers of groupthink, who infected several generations with the ideological virus that reality is determined through consensus, and the collective will soon, and I do mean soon, they will discover, and if you're in this camp, you will too soon discover that your delusions, their delusions of grandeur are about to end. The scientific elite, who have so pompously paraded before us the unwashed masses, the serfs, the useless eaters, their words, not mine, are apparently not paying attention to their visual and auditory senses in their 3-dimensional parade. The crowds are pointing and laughing at them, viewing them as naked. The emperor has no clothes, and in this case today, in this venue, in this time period, that's true. Scientists who actually hold themselves accountable to the scientific method and empirical evidence, and think about this, have a far more accurate view of reality that includes not only string theory, but the reality of the 4th dimension. And folks, it is from this 4th dimension that physical reality is created. Now think about that. Unlimited energy can be accessed from this dimension, along with the power to heal, the power to create. Conversely, great evil and destructive forces can be transferred from this 4th dimension. Remember us talking about Tesla? Stan Dale talks about Nikola Tesla, and of course, we talk about it frequently. Nikola Tesla attempted to offer this understanding to humanity back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and was suppressed. The suppression of truth is an act of violence against God. Think about that. Going back to the highly advanced civilizations before the flood, and this is what Coach Dave was talking about, and he says, he took a trip and he downloaded some of our programs, and after After about 3 programs, I think his wife was ready to throw him out of the car. Because, in one of the programs was with Paul McGuire. But going back to the highly advanced civilizations before the flood, and you got to understand the importance of that statement. Beings descended upon Earth from the 4th dimension to have sex with human women. We know this. They produce a hybrid race of the Nephilim. Steve Quayle authoritatively has written on the Nephilim. Human beings who originally inhabited Earth as it was intended were immortal and lived in paradise. They were created from the substance of Earth based on original source programming, which was embedded in their DNA by the infinite personal living God of the universe. Okay? However, the first man and woman chose to shatter their perfect world. They then allowed their DNA code to be deconstructed by 4th dimensional energies and began to experience this brand new reality, death. You're not going to hear about this in your churches. You're not going to hear about this in the scientific community. You're not going to hear about this in from paleontologists or whoever. But one more thing that happened. They opened a portal into the 4th dimension that allowed the sons of God to enter the physical world. These sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, they began mating with human women and producing a race of, quote, God men called the Nephilim. This is what Steve Quayle talks about. This is what Paul McGuire talks about and has written about. This interbreeding reprogrammed the DNA code of mankind, and a kind of DNA war began. This is where we are today. When we talk about the mark of the beast, think about reprogramming your DNA. It's all about the blood of Jesus, but the blood of man. The blood or the DNA, it's all about the DNA. The cosmic war that's going on right now between God and Lucifer that started in the 4th dimension is now being fought on Earth. And this is what people don't get. And this is, by the way, this is what the conference, Russ Dizdar and others, this is what's going to be being addressed at this conference. The cosmic war between God and Lucifer that started in this 4th dimension is now being fought on Earth. The flood of Noah really was a preemptive strike by God to destroy the reprogrammed DNA code. Why am I talking about this as opposed to ISIS and Ebola? Because it all comes down to this, in my view. One thing I didn't add when I said that I had a quote writer's block when I was talking to Judy from Canada Free Press is it's because of the amount of information. It's comparable to information triage, headline triage. Because you see, we're being pointed by the Illuminati-controlled mass media in certain directions. We're being made to look in certain directions. Our focus is being put in certain areas. Meanwhile, things are getting away from us. It's not a writer's block. It's a triage situation. But we must understand that the cosmic war, well, look, the DNA code that was deconstructed by the 4th dimension energies, by the 4th dimension Nephilim, there was a new reality, as I mentioned, death, that was brought into the equation. Additionally, they opened a portal into the 4th dimension that allowed the sons of God to enter the physical world, that bore repetition. It did. Interbreeding, as I mentioned, reprogrammed the DNA code of mankind, and this DNA war began back then. There is a cosmic war right now taking place between God and Lucifer. It's being played out here on earth as well as it is in heaven, in the heavens. The transhumanist movement, we hear about this. Do we really know? Do we really understand the crux of the transhumanist movement? It's about using human, Nephilim, and animal genes to produce a race of God men. Folks, this is exactly what the Nazi scientists were doing in their laboratories as they combined genetic science with the intelligence and energy that they were transferring from this other dimension through the Vril force. We talked about the Vril force. You can search Vril and research that, V-R-I-L. This great DNA war is part of the greater war between God and Lucifer. Lucifer is attempting to create this new man. And believe me, he's got a lot of allies terrestrially to assist him in this. God created new men and women through the supernatural power of Christ. Now, these men and women are regenerated not by the Vril force or a Vril force, but through the Spirit of God. Can you see where I'm going with this? Can you see where Paul McGuire is going with this as well? I mean, really, this is Paul McGuire. As these men and women are regenerated by the Spirit of God, they are transformed into new creations. As such, they're going to be resurrected from the dead and moved into the dimension where heaven exists. In heaven, they're going to be given glorified and perfect bodies. That's us, along with a vast array of supernatural powers. We're not going to be passive creatures, because we're going to be reigning with Christ forever in the kingdom of God. How many times have you heard this, at least the thin veneer of that, but not understood the physics behind it? It's like reading the Bible and not understanding the physics that's contained in the Bible. The Bible is like a physics lesson. It really is. Lucifer, and by the way, this is a numbers game. This is a DNA game. This is a battle for your blood, your DNA, and ultimately your soul. Lucifer is pushing for an all-out confrontation with God on the earthly battlefield, and that's called Armageddon. He's organizing a new world order, which is a counterfeit of the kingdom of God. What the Luciferians are doing when we talk about this, whether it's Ebola or ISIS or insert headline here, James' version of the Bible is being perverted, being followed to the letter, but perverted, turned upside down by these Luciferians. We are at the precipice of seeing something far above a clash of civilizations. That's a phrase based on the very simplistic view of the nature of reality that's fed to the masses by the global power brokers, such as the Council for Foreign Relations and other Illuminati front groups like the Trilateral Commission and so on. We are about to experience a clash of spiritual kingdoms. We're about to experience multi-dimensional warfare. I happen to be, during my research today, to tell you how far down this rabbit trail I did go. I happened to view the videos of Charlie Manson. in his interviews. Oh, yeah. The reason is because the not only the time period, but the evil at that time, and the origin, the genesis of evil, and how Susan Atkins and Tex Watson and the others. I watched an interview of Susan Atkins before she died of brain cancer. Susan Atkins was one of the murderers with Sharon Tate, although she denies killing Sharon Tate. But folks, if you happen to go into this deep, dark rabbit hole, you can see where, well, she even admits, for example, that there was such an evil presence. She in one of her interviews, and I believe this is in 93-ish, she talks about being at the murder scene with Sharon Tate, with Tex Watson. She relays the story of them breaking into the house, Tex Watson and Susan Atkins. Susan had a knife, bound one of the victim's hands with a towel, the knife in her hand, raised the knife over her head, and was going to stab this young man. And she said it was as if there was an unseen force that grabbed my hand that prevented me from plunging the knife into his chest. Now, look, this is a jailhouse interview, of course, and she was convicted of murder. She denies killing or denies stabbing anyone. She's lying about it. To me, is irrelevant. But what she described next was the behavior of Tex Watson. This superhuman, supernatural possession of this guy, of this murderer, in this slaughterhouse involving Sharon Tate, where Sharon Tate was killed. Now, folks, if you don't remember that time, if you're not old enough to remember that time, it was gruesome, but it was born out of pure evil. And Paul McGuire talks about this counterculture, the Haight-Ashbury district, this is what Russ Dizdar talks about. This evil presence, this satanic presence. As I was watching this today, folks, and I'm talking about 3 hours worth of interviews, 3 hours worth of court testimony, I've got to tell you, I understand. I totally understand. I get it now. If you were alive during the Tate LaBianca murders and the Folger, I think it was Folger murders right after that, the Charles Manson time, if you were alive and if you remember the pervasive evil behind the Manson cult, some say, based on my research, I do believe this is a direct product of the Tavistock Institute, of mind control, MKUltra, CIA type stuff. But I also believe that it's a product of a spiritual evil that is so bad, that has permeated the earth. We're going to be seeing more. We're going to be seeing the Charlie Manson type activity in different forms take root and take place in the West. Now, whether that's via ISIS, I'm sure it will be. Could it be through other Charles Manson-type characters? I'm sure it will be. Oh, and by the way, I had checked, and I wanted to verify this. So during my research, I had made a phone call to Los Angeles. Do you know that Charles Manson today, that more letters, he is the most sought after, written to inmate in the history of the United States, or has been. Expect this to manifest itself. You know, I don't even know the TV show. Walking Dead, I believe it is. There are several various TV shows. I'm just absolutely surprised that Christians actually watch. But this is, I truly believe, based on the research that I've done, and if you look back and if you dissect the evil that is part of this, and you talk to Russ Dizdar, and you go through ShatterTheDarkness.net, his website, and you go through the various videos that he has and the study guides, we are fighting a supernatural fight. And I've got to tell you, this really hit me when Joe and I were scheduled to go to, where was it, Chicago? Believe. Man, look, I don't know. Maybe I just got a bug or something, a virus. I don't know. But what hit me so hard, illness-wise, where I lost my voice, and my throat was closing up, and I was coughing up blood clots. I mean, that's never happened to me before. I could barely swallow a glass of water. I called the doctor, went in for a doctor's appointment, just for the nurse. The nurse looked at me, expecting just no big deal. She said, "Wait a minute. I'll be right back." She comes back with the doctor. She said, "You got to look at this." In fact, the doctor says, "Wow, whatever's going on in there," meaning my throat, he said, "that's some bad stuff." And they took a culture, and they said, we don't know we don't know what kind of virus this is. I mean, I'm sure they could have done testing, additional testing, but he said it's not strep, and it's not bacterial, it's a viral infection. But he said it's one of the worst cases I've ever seen. But that didn't happen until we had made the final arrangements to go to Chicago. The subject: satanic ritual abuse, Satanism, satanic crimes. Now, look, I don't know. I don't know what it was. All I'm saying is, when the gentleman that were on before asked you to pray for those people, the presenters, we're not presenters, by the way, the presenters, the people who are disclosing this, people like Russ Dizdar and others, please pray for them. Their protection over them. Please. Their families. Something else happened last week I did not share with the audience, and I'll just share this on a very limited basis. Extremely limited. Something happened where a routine test of someone very close to me came back, and phone rang, and the doctor says, "Look, we want you to come in. Something wrong." Person went in and had some retesting done. And praise God, it was just an anomaly. It was actually a artifact on a film. But that cost us a few days, basically, a few days of production, a few days of moving forward. The reason I mention that is if you've noticed in your life, and this is what I truly believe, if you've noticed in your life that all of a sudden things are getting real tough for you, or you wake up in the morning thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to do today. You have a list. And all of a sudden, you got to throw your list away because you've got putting fires out. You're busy putting fires out. You're busy handling things that are coming at you from the left and the right. You're busy ducking, and you feel like you're in the boxing ring with Muhammad Ali or whoever. I don't follow boxing, but you know what I mean? Mike Tyson. Then you're over the target. The more trouble, in my view, the more swipes that people will take at you, unjustifiable and unjustified swipes, to me means you're closer to the enemy than ever. You're closer to the target. And it doesn't mean to retreat. It means to push forward. Keep going. What's that saying? When you're going through hell, the worst thing to do is stop. Just keep going. But understand, Lucifer is pushing for an all-out confrontation with God on the earthly battlefield. And again, he's organizing a new world order, which is a counterfeit of the kingdom of God. This is not a small matter. There are powerful, multidimensional forces moving through the American matrix that can only be perceived through enhanced sensory input. And I'm not talking about drugs. I'm talking about prayer. I'm talking about looking at the situations through biblical and spiritual, the Word of God and biblical prophecy. Today, America is in grave danger. Violence, war, deception, chaos. Those are the headlines of today. I received, in fact, I'll probably be linking this to our website. Like nature, with its storms and seasons, the world around us keeps changing, and not for the better, by the way. In the midst of the spreading corruption, are we prepared? And I guess we have to ask this question, are we prepared to stand firm in Christ no matter what? Are you prepared? Us older folks still remember World War II. Well, I shouldn't say remember World War II. We remember the results of World War II, the devastation. I was talking to my father-in-law, and he was born in the 30s, and he remembers the war. In fact, he remembers the war better than he remembers yesterday, but you can learn so much by talking with older people. It seems like many of us today's general peace, or at least peace here in North America, for granted, ignoring the fact that we will face, I don't have any doubt in my mind, we're going to face unthinkable turmoil, lawlessness like we've never seen because of this multidimensional warfare. If you're a Christian today, and Christians around the world are facing hatred, hostility, persecution, death, look, we know this. Now we're in America, we're facing this legal battle so we can keep our religious beliefs. But you see, the socialist, Luciferian, progressive people pray for those people, obviously. We need to pray for America as well. You know, we cannot, folks, ignore the moral and spiritual corruption in the anti-Christian environment, which is in full swing in America today, and it's only going to get worse. If you look at our freedoms, I mentioned about the Kentucky situation. The commissioner in Kentucky saying, "Well, you know what? You, Mr. Business Owner, because you refused to print T-shirts for the Gay and Lesbian Services Organization, the Lexington Pride Festival, we're going to make you go to diversity training." My answer to that is, like hell you are. No, we're gonna take over as Christians. We are going to take over this country again. But see, if I could say this, there's this divisiveness among Christians today. You see it with the rapture, talk of the rapture. Don't you get it? Don't you get it, folks? I know our audience does. Mention the word rapture and everybody comes unglued. Look, I'm not a scriptorian. I'm not a Bible expert. All I can say is this. From what I see, from my corner, from my purview, is that Lucifer, the Luciferians, this is what they want. They want to divide our house. They want to pit Christian against Christian because a house divided can't stand. They want to pit. They want to have us fighting over doctrine. And let me tell you, they're very virulent about it. Those Christians who fight over doctrine. Not an indictment. This is an observation. Can we afford that? Can we afford to frag our brethren over this? If we look back in history, in 1940, when the world stood at the brink of World War II, Japan had been ravaging China and Korea. The Italian armies of Mussolini had occupied Ethiopia and Africa. They're persecuting Christians, and Hitler, who had already annexed Austria and Czechoslovakia, invaded Romania and planned to conquer all of Europe and much more. It's interesting because the global elite on the opposing side of that war would use the spreading turmoil to build support for their vision of a secular United Nations and a global union. After all, the historical record is full of hidden agendas, expedient lies, and deadly destruction. If you look at what's taking place today, just look back in history. There's this cycle, and it's a timeless cycle, of peace, compromise, rebellion against God, then war, and then repentance continues to shape the world that we live in. But so do the globalist power brokers, the Luciferians, the Illuminati, whatever you want to call them. They're still here. And their foot soldiers are still here. If we look back in time, just very briefly, and I know we're running out of time, folks, but in 1913, Woodrow Wilson wrote in his book, by the way, I should mention this. This is, I'm paraphrasing an article from crossroad.to. I will link to this article. But the author goes into great detail of looking at the historical template from the 20th century into what we're seeing today. And an argument can be made, and a good one, that history is cyclical, and folks, it's not going to end well. not for Christians, not for Jews. Ultimately, it's not going to end well except for the radical Islamic violence that we see with ISIS and even with what is coming to America fits the agenda of the global elite. Do you think for one moment, ladies and gentlemen, that it's an accident that Barack Hussein Obama, and please let that name sink in. I guess you don't have to do that, but Barack Hussein Obama, do you think it's an accident that he's being used to empower the Muslim Brotherhood here in America? If you go back in history and look at what Hitler did to the Jews, I'm sure much of what Obama has done and is doing in the Middle East would fit right in with Hitler's dream of a vast and violent Islamic territory submitted to his Nazi reign and trained to serve their mutual oppressive goal. Folks, you can study this, the Nazi Arab plots to terminate the Jews. Well, this is what's taking place today, except this is not a Nazi Arab plot. This is a globalist Islamic caliphate plot to exterminate 90% of the world's population. And I go back to fighting, or because of the time factor here, we can't get into all of this, but I go back to what Paul McGuire said about Lucifer pushing for an all-out confrontation with God on this earthly battlefield. Folks, this is coming to a town near you. The reality, if you look at what's taking place, that that many ideas that our society is operating under, what our perceptions are, and the evidence is the social, cultural, economic, and human results of those ideas of the operations. All of this is being censored. The reality is being censored. The answers that we're looking for as a collective, if you will, have been and are being censored from us and are being kept under lock and key in the deep vaults of the multidimensional universe inside of our DNA. It goes back to our DNA. Citing Paul McGuire now. The global elites and the self-appointed gatekeepers of the human mind have completely shut down all perception programming, which allows us to understand the multidimensional nature of reality. We are living in a multidimensional reality, yet we are not being told this. It's being censored. It's not being taught in churches. The Bible is a book of multidimensional reality. The Bible is a book of physics. The Bible is a book of the tale of the accounts, not tale, but the accounts of the Nephilim, of the giants, of the fallen angels. What was and what is to come. But we're not being told that. The gatekeepers have a vested interest in not wanting the masses, that's you and me, to know where these vaults are hidden in the fourth dimension, because that is where the power comes from. It's kind of like the Planet of the Apes movies where the protagonist is riding on the beach, sees the head of the Statue of Liberty at that moment. We realize that a lot of stuff has been hidden. These gatekeepers that I'm referring to, and Paul McGuire refers to in his book, Standing Down Goliath, they've used social engineering, psychotropic drugs, the media, to program mass consciousness so that people will believe that things like religion, like God, morality, sin, Satan, heaven, earth, or heaven, they're fairy tales and myths for the ignorant and uneducated. How many times have you seen a story appear or an article appear, whether it's on Breitbart or any website that has, or any news site that has a comment section? How many times have you read the comments where the comments refer to heaven or those people who embrace religion or theology? We're crazy. We're ignorant. Religion is for the ignorant, the uneducated. Oh, really? Well, the strategy behind this mind control is to manipulate our fear of being perceived as ignorant and to use it as a mechanism to keep us from discovering the real nature of reality beyond the matrix. Paul McGuire cites an example. What if all those stories and accounts of the Garden of Eden, God, Moses, the Red Sea splitting, and so on, all of those were not just symbols, myths, and made-up stories? What if at the very least they contained a cybernetic coded message about mankind and your future, our future? Any sane, rational, and intelligent person would have to admit the amount of energy and organizational power that is being used in an attempt to demonize Christians, God, and the Bible is overkill. Well, that's exactly, folks, it's exactly what the Illuminati, the Luciferians, and I will say the socialist Democrats, and progressives are doing. Wow. I can't believe, folks, that we're at the end of the program already. I just want to say thank you so very much for being a part of our program tonight. Joe will be back with us tomorrow. Tomorrow, of course, Tuesdays with Stan Dale. Gosh, what a great, I'm looking forward to that as well. A lot of questions for Stan. And folks, don't forget the conference in November 14th and 15th. That's really, a month from tomorrow. If you can join us, we'd love to meet you face to face. We're going to be there, that's for sure. As sure as we can be on an earthly sense. And I just can't wait. Just want to thank you all for your belief and your trust in us. God bless you. Until tomorrow, stay safe.